how people respond to your boundaries tells you so much about them. And that's one of the beautiful things about boundaries, which is once you start setting them, it becomes really clear. The minute I set a boundary with someone and they just immediately walk over it, that's kind of it for me. Hello, and welcome to How to Be a Terrible Daughter, the podcast where we hate your parents for you.
Oh, yes, we do. This is a podcast for anyone that's ever been called terrible or horrible or a monster or ungrateful by their family.
Ugh, sorry. I just remember those times I was actually called that. Oy.
The podcast where we trigger each other while recording the podcast.
The podcast where success is that every single person dissociates by the end of the podcast, listener and host. Okay. So as you can tell, we're going to joke about our horrible childhoods, and we're going to talk about how we survived them, specifically the tools that we learned to help us get through this and come out the other end with real lives and real relationships.
You said that, and I was like, do I have real relationships? Yes, I do.
I'm right here.
Who are we? I'm Megan Caper, and I am an occupational therapist and an energy healer.
I'm Elizabeth Malamed. I am an artist and a psychotherapist. And we're cousins.
We're cousins.
Yeah.
So we grew up together, watching each other's families be crazy, and somehow both surviving and being sane. I'm not sure how we did that, but good for us.
There's only one in every nuclear family.
There is. There's like the one person who actually like does the work, and then of course becomes like the freak of the family because no one understands them. Or maybe that's just me.
Oh no, it's me too. You see me, Megan.
So today we're going to actually expand upon a topic that we touched on before in one of our previous episodes, but it is a big topic. I mean, we could probably do many, many episodes about this because it's a big one. And so today we're going to talk about boundaries.
I'm sorry, what? What are those things?
Boundaries are something that if you had a family like ours, you never learned how to practice when you were a child. Boundaries are the things that you need to put in place or you need to request or you need to do in order to feel comfortable and safe. So comfortable and safe is about being in the present moment. It's about feeling your nervous system relax in whatever situation you're in or what people you're around, or at least be more relaxed. And it's sort of knowing yourself and what you need in order to function best and function in a way that feels calm, that feels supported around the people and in the environments you live in.
Mm-hmm. I've also heard an addition to that, which is you feel really in touch with your own power, but you don't feel the need to use it in the moment.
Ooh,
yeah.
I like that. I like that. And I'm going to actually pull from my occupational therapy background and talk a little bit about what's called PEO. PEO is one of the frameworks of OT practice, and it stands for person, environment, and occupation. Occupation here doesn't necessarily mean job. It just means like whatever occupies your time. So that could be, cooking or taking a shower or just anything that occupies your time. And I really feel like we need to have boundaries in all of these areas. So we need to have boundaries around other people, right? So that's sort of usually when people are talking about boundaries, that's what they're talking about, right? Is how to have boundaries with other people. But I also feel like the environments we work in, right? So if an environment is, I'm just thinking of like those open office environments where everybody like switches desks every day and it's loud and you like that. I couldn't work very well in that environment, right? So I would have to have a boundary around that being like, no, actually, in order for me to work best and feel the most calm and the most productive, like I need a desk where I can put my stuff and come to every day. And it needs to be like relatively quiet, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
environment can also be something. And then the occupation itself. So, how do you like to do things? Are you being required in your life to do things in a way that feels stressful? And are there ways that you can do them that would feel less stressful or more
Mm-hmm.
empowered, as you said, is sort of the other way to think about that. Yeah, so that's sort of, I think that it's important to talk about boundaries in all three of those areas because, especially if you were raised by narcissists or emotionally immature parents, you weren't allowed to have a say in any of those things. When we talked a little bit in past episodes about your room and how little control you had over your environment in your room or your house, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For me, with the occupations, like I wasn't really allowed to do things. And again, it wasn't ever explicitly said, but it was absolutely implicitly said that I was only allowed to do activities that were like acceptable to my parents, which in my case were like intellectual activities or musical activities, or right. Like I wasn't given free reign to do whatever I wanted to do for after school activities or for summer activities or whatever, right? Had to be one of these sort of prescribed things, right? So
Yeah.
even my occupations, I wasn't allowed to have good boundaries around what felt good and what didn't feel good to me. So I think it's important to, as we talk about boundaries and as we talk about all these things, to remember that these can apply to any of those person, environment, or occupation. It can apply to any of those three.
Mm-hmm. And if you already know about boundaries, fine tuning them can be really good if you look at your boundaries from this person, environment, and occupational way, because you'll find probably these really subtle areas where you're giving yourself up in a way. And I think one of the things about boundaries that's helpful is that if you're constantly undercutting yourself, making yourself uncomfortable and unsafe and stressed out, then if the time comes when you really need to put yourself aside and help someone or have it be about them or whatever, you can't do that. And that's one of the things that I noticed, which is like my mom never knew when she was hungry. She never knew when she was tired. And she would just have these blow ups that it was so clear that it was like she did not know how to care for herself in all of these little ways. And that really contributed to her overall selfishness because there were moments where it shouldn't have been about her. But there's all of these little things that she could have done, for herself that would have made it maybe more possible for her to be there for someone else. I know that that's true for me.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's a good point. If you have good boundaries around, like, I'm hungry, I need to eat, right? Like, if you're someone whose blood sugar tanks, or for me, like, I need to take breaks and rest. If I'm not someone who can go out and go all day. I need to come home and like have 20 minutes of quiet and then I can go to the next activity, right? And if you don't have good boundaries around those things, you're absolutely going to be emotionally dysregulated at some point during the day or even physiologically dysregulated if it's around food or water or something, right? And yeah, you'll lose your ability to like be calm and centered and collected. And then that affects the people around you. So boundaries are not just for like you, they're also for everyone else around you and to make relationships more harmonious.
yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about what is a boundary, because I think it is a hot topic. It's a hot topic these days, boundaries. And I think there's a little bit of a misconception that a boundary is like a line in the sand or a rule you put in place that people can't treat you that way or can't say that to you. And it's not actually quite what it is, because that's giving other people way too much power to be able to cross that line or not do that thing. And that's not
Yeah.
how, at least for me, that's not how I want to approach boundaries. Because again, it's about empowering myself, right? Not disempowering other people or limiting what they can or can't do. So yeah, they're not limits for other people, but they're ways that we care for ourselves, as you sort of talked about, in certain situations, right? So they're more like rules we have for ourselves and not for other people. So if
Mm-hmm.
I know that I'm going to crash if I don't have a snack by 2 p.m. or something, I have a rule for myself. Like, no matter what's happening, I'm going to stop and get a snack, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's just important.
Yeah. And my experience is that so much of boundaries come out of not from monitoring the outside, but really sitting with myself and being present with myself, especially being connected to my body, because my most instinctual needs, right, are my body is usually the one that kind of tells me that. And if I'm not listening to my body, then there's all of these things that all of these boundaries that I can't set for myself because I'm not even aware. And for me, that requires solitude. I need to be by myself enough so that my situational awareness turns off and I can turn my attention inside. And that will tell me a lot about what I need for myself and what limits I need to set.
And I think that's an important point, is that before you can even set a boundary, you have to know what your needs are. And if you've grown up in a family where your needs were absolutely never centered, you very quickly learn to override whatever your needs are in this really automatic way, where it's not like it registers and then you ignore it. You just go straight to ignoring it, right? It's not even registering. And over time, in your brain, there's a saying, neurons that fire together wire together, right? So in your brain, you actually create these pathways that bypass your awareness of your own needs. And so the first step is to tune into that awareness and not even necessarily do anything about it or set any boundaries. The first step is just to become aware. What feels off in this situation to me, right? What is my body needing right now? Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Do I have to pee? Do I need to rest? Am I feeling overwhelmed? To just really check in and become curious about that internal landscape and that internal world and how that internal landscape is reacting to the people around you, the environments around you, the things you're doing, right? And how you're doing them. And that, I think, is almost the hardest part sometimes. Well, telling narcissists that you're setting a boundary is also pretty hard. We'll get to that in a minute. But but to start with, just developing that awareness. And I always encourage my clients to spend a lot of time in this stage of just gently, with a loving curiosity. I know that sounds foreign to a lot of you because you never got it as a child, but to very gently and with loving curiosity, explore what it is you need. You know, like you would respond to a baby or a small child and try to help them figure out what's going on and what they need.
Yeah. I also think that really kind of trusting yourself kind of out the gate and trusting yourself with whatever information that you have. You don't need to have a fully fleshed out understanding. And this may be a little bit advanced, but I'm telling you this so that you have a sense of permission. I've gotten to a point where sometimes, like, all I can say is, I'm really uncomfortable right now. I'm uncomfortable with this. And that's a complete sentence, right? You don't have to justify it to yourself or anyone else. And you can kind of let that be. I know for me, that's usually the start of, like, I am uncomfortable and I need to go and I need to figure out why I'm uncomfortable. I'm just going to put a pin in that and I am not going to continue whatever's happening right now because I need to go figure it out.
Yeah. And trusting that you have people in your life that if you say to them, you know, I'm uncomfortable, I need a break, that will be accepted and appreciated, right? And you won't get pushback of like, well, what do you mean you're uncomfortable? Why is this uncomfortable? You shouldn't be uncomfortable. All of the sort of denial and all of that we got as kids, right? Like, so part of it too is trusting that the person you're communicating with is going to want you not to be uncomfortable. That's actually something that they would appreciate, is your comfort and your happiness and your feelings of safety. And that they will appreciate you saying, I need to go figure this out, right? So to me, that was always, it was a stumbling block, right? Of like, is this okay for me to say? Are they going to get mad at me? You know? And so just knowing that it's okay. And if they get mad at you, that's about them, not you. And in fact, is a really good sign that that may not be a good person for you to be around, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. How people respond to your boundaries tells you so much about them. And that's one of the beautiful things about boundaries, which is once you start setting them, it becomes really clear. The minute I set a boundary with someone and they just immediately walk over it, that's kind of it for me. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm keeping you at a distance from this moment on. I mean, I don't know if that sounds, whatever, cut off or whatever, but it's like, I got a lot going on.
Yeah.
I don't have time to deal with whatever, I don't know, growth opportunity that may be for me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nope.
I saw on social media at some point, somebody posted something about when you are starting a new relationship. And I think they were referring to romantic relationships, but could actually be true of any relationship. Set a really small boundary that
Yeah.
feels arbitrary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it could be like, hey, don't text me after 10 p.m. on weekdays, right? Just something small.
Mm-hmm.
Or I prefer to be called by this nickname or something, right? Just something really small that's not a bother at all for the other person to do, and see if they're able to respect that. Because if they can't respect a little boundary, they're absolutely not going to respect it when it comes to the bigger things, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk a little bit about like what a boundary look like, because again, I think it's very trendy right now, but I want to give some examples so people know, because I mean, you and I don't know about you, I didn't grow up ever being able to set any kind of boundary. And so I didn't even know what that would look like or sound like when I became an adult, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, having a boundary isn't saying like, hey, mom, you're not allowed to talk about politics, right? Because again, that's putting the power in their hands, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's, hey, mom, it makes me really uncomfortable when we talk about politics. So if you talk about politics, I'm going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm empowered, right? I am the one who has the agency in that situation and can make that choice. And then you actually do it, right?
Yeah.
So, I usually would give like one or two reminders, right? Be like, hey, I don't know if you remember, but I said that if we
Right.
talk about politics, that I was going to leave. And you just brought up politics. So just letting you know, if it happens again in this conversation, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to get up and walk away. I'm letting you know now. And then if it happened again, or I should say with my mother, when it happened again, I wouldn't say anything. I wouldn't be like, hey, you talked about politics again, so I'm leaving, because that would cause some sort of drama. I didn't know that topic was off. Is that really political or whatever, right?
Uh-huh.
I would just be like, okay, as I said, I'm leaving because of politics. Bye. And I would just
Mm-hmm.
leave, right?
Yeah.
So it's really about putting things in a place where you have set a limit about what feels okay. And I'm thinking of another example at work. Sometimes we have meetings that go really, really, really late. And I've gotten to a point where I'm like, hey, by the way, I'm leaving at 5 when the workday is over. And, I'm not even gonna, I say this at the beginning of the meeting. I'm like, I'm just gonna hop off the Zoom call. I'm not gonna say goodbye or anything. I'm just letting you guys know that at 5 I'm going because I've got something else to do. That something
Mm-hmm.
else to do is just live my life, right? But,
Yes.
that is something else to do. So, that is a boundary too. Like I am putting the agency in my purview and I am acting on it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I am not giving a shit how other people feel about it.
Yeah.
That's the second part, right? So you
Yes.
sort of make a limit and say, I'm going to enforce this limit. This is important to me. And again, it can be around people, like how long I'm willing to spend with this person. It can be around the environment. Yes, I'm happy to go to Costco with you, but I really can't be in there for more than half an hour or I'll go crazy, right? Or it can be around the occupation, which is like these work meetings, right? Like I can't be in a meeting that goes later than this. And then you act on it. And then the second part is let the person react the way they're going to react. That's not your responsibility. Absolutely
Mm-hmm.
not your responsibility.
Yeah.
You
And
know?
then also when you're new to this, right? When you start setting boundaries, And you have to enforce them because that's part of it. They're just going to push you to have some support ready and available for when you enforce them, because you'll freak out. So, like, I'm thinking about a time we went out to dinner for my birthday and my mom started in about something. And I said, I really don't want to talk about this. This doesn't really feel like a celebration. We're here for my birthday. And she
Right.
just kind of went on. And I was like, this really doesn't feel very good. And it's making me feel like I want to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So can we have a nice dinner and whatever? And she just kept going. And I just turned to my husband and I was like, I really feel like leaving right now. We're leaving right now. And like, we just got up and left. And then we walked around the neighborhood for like an hour with me freaking out and just being like, oh my God, I did that.
What
And
did
like,
I do?
oh my God, did I
Yeah.
fuck up? And like, I'm a terrible person, and blah, blah,
Right.
blah, blah. And he talked me down.
Well, and can I point out that I can see how, from an outside perspective, if the story you told about that was we were having a nice birthday dinner for Elizabeth, and in the middle of it, she just got up and left. How rude, right? Like,
Mhm.
but you know what's really rude there? It actually wasn't you getting up and walking away. What was rude is you explaining very clearly, your actions are making me uncomfortable, and her not stopping.
Yeah.
That was rude. What you
Hmm.
did was just taking care of yourself,
Yeah.
right? But I guarantee you, when she told that story to other people, she did not include the part where you asked her politely and very clearly several times to stop doing what she was doing, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
think that's another thing, talking about the freak out. I know for me, I'd be like, oh my, yeah, you said, well, was that rude? Was that inappropriate? And realizing that if you've clearly stated your boundaries, which is again why it's so important to become aware of them in the first place, right?
Hmm.
You're aware of them and you've stated them calmly and clearly, and they do it again, and you give them a reminder, hey, I just said X, Y, or Z, right? Then they're
Yeah.
the rude ones. They're the ones who
Yeah.
are acting inappropriately.
Yeah. And if you have a narcissistic parent, you have been trained to feel like shit when you do something right. Because something that honors your own personhood, you have gotten so much negative reinforcement for that, that it is going to feel bad. And my husband said something really amazing to me. This was a bunch of years ago. I was on the phone with him, kind of doing a debrief about something that happened professionally. And I was like, I just feel like shit. And he's like, yeah, sometimes winning feels this bad, right? You did everything right and you won. And this is how shitty it feels. And so to really kind of understand and prepare, and also like have people online, online, not online, but like, I had my husband to talk to. I had my therapist a couple days later. I had people to call and just be like, oh my God, did I totally do something crazy? And the answer was no. It was
Right.
my birthday dinner. I mean, like,
Yeah.
how hard is it to be pleasant for an hour?
Right.
Right.
I think that it's, we're sort of talking about this, and I'm glad you brought this up, because we're sort of talking about like, well, you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this. But the emotional reality of setting boundaries with someone, especially someone that you're new to setting boundaries with, and they're used to railroading all over you,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard. I mean, you're going to get pushback from them. You might get pushback from the flying monkeys around them. Your own internalized version of your parent in your own head is going to give you pushback. Like, was that rude? Was that okay? From all of the
Mm-hmm.
years of gaslighting that you had to endure, right? It is a really tough thing. And I think your point about having a support system around you who really understands. And again, this is one of the reasons we wanted to start this podcast, is we want a community of people who get it. Because if you haven't had a narcissist in your life,
Oh boy.
you don't get how what you did in leaving that dinner is absolutely the appropriate thing, right?
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
someone else whose family didn't have narcissists, that probably would have been a rude thing to do or a reactionary thing to do,
Yeah.
right?
It's similar to dealing with someone who has like an addiction. right? Which is all of the things that we're socialized to do with people normally. None of those things work because they enable the person's addiction. It's not so different here, which is that being polite and seeing the other person's point of view and being whatever about your boundaries, that enables the mental illness of this person that is violating your boundaries and not seeing you as a person.
Yeah. You wanted to talk about agency mantras.
Yes. So in my theoretical orientation, which is called integrative body psychotherapy, we have these statements that are like mantras that we can learn and tell ourselves as a corrective thought against the bullshit that we get from narcissists. So agency is a little bit of it's kind of jargon, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to substitute the term agency for self-abandonment. So in most situations, agency means like, I have agency. I can make choices for myself. So I'm going to give you a couple of these. These are mantras. And of course, I had to learn them, which is good, right? I can set limits and I'm willing to enforce them. I am not selfish when I think of myself or act in my own behalf. I have a right to my own body voice, my own toothbrush, to know what I think and want, and to speak up and ask for it. I will not abandon myself when I most need my own support. This is not a crisis. It is only my habit of self-abandonment that tells me that it is. Self-abandonment is just a habit that I don't have to continue. And then there's one more, which I just love, which is only in my body can I tell the difference between an act of caring and an act of self-abandonment. Setting limits is not the end of love. It is the beginning.
I love that last one.
Oh, it's so good.
Setting limits is not the end of love. It is only the beginning. That's really good. Can you speak a little bit to what you mean by self-abandonment? Because that's a term I only learned maybe a couple years ago. I feel like it may be new for some people.
Yeah. Well, there's kind of an image that comes up, which is if you think of yourself as like you've got your own bubble, right? When you abandon yourself, you empty part of yourself to create room for another person. The difficulty with that is that you've lost a part of yourself, essentially. You've given a part of yourself away. And again, that's not the same as sharing. So, yeah, I think self-abandonment is a form of turning off your inner voice, refusing to listen to your needs, treating yourself like an object. And I think in a profound way, it is a continuation of the abuse that the narcissist enacted on you, and you are doing it yourself, to yourself.
Yeah.
Right. So it's something as simple as, refusing to give yourself the comfortable pillow to sleep on, or, I don't know, eating the cheese in the fridge to finish it up when you're not hungry, or not getting gas in your car until you're on fumes, right? Even though that brings your anxiety up to like a 10. Those are simple ones, but yeah.
I think it's this idea that growing up with a narcissist, there was actual or implied abandonment at every turn. So there was this sort of idea that if you don't do things the way I want you to do them, I'm either going to actually leave you or maybe give you the silent treatment or call you horrible or terrible, right? And I think we start preemptively doing that in ourselves. So we start trying to read the other person and we think, what would they need? What would upset them? Right. And we try to do the opposite of what would upset them. We try to preemptively take care of their needs without considering whether or not it's something we actually want to do or we actually need
Yeah.
or don't need, right? It's like the abuse that you got from the narcissist, you learned so well that you start correcting your behavior before they even can. You
Mm-hmm.
start doing it to yourself,
Yeah.
right? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's, I think, where the self-abandonment piece comes in, right? Is they either explicitly or implicitly abandoned you all the time, right? It was hot or cold with them. And when it was cold, it was terrible. It felt awful. We start learning how to be so good at avoiding those cold situations or those cold triggers for them that we do it without even thinking before we even know what we're doing.
Yeah. My experience was that the person who is in the most crisis is the person who gets help.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't ask for help or nurturing until it was an absolute crisis, which of course was screwed up at that point, because that, of course, was the very moment that I couldn't get what I needed, because the narcissist is always in crisis in some way or another, or they're
Yeah.
just a hair's breadth away.
Right.
And so, again, you're very smart and you learn very well that it's like, okay, I'm just going to ignore these little things and little things and little things until I can't anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And just to give an example, like I remember when I was in my early 20s and I was going to school and I was working and I was pre-med and I was doing all these things and I was so stressed out and I was super financially strapped, but I didn't ask for help because that wasn't appropriate because I was doing what I was supposed to do. I was going to school and I was working and all those things.
And
And
suffering.
and suffering, right? And it got
That's
to
what
the
you're supposed to
point
do.
where the job I had was working as a medical assistant in a pediatrician's office. And I kept getting recurring bouts of strep throat, which, happens when you're treating a bunch of kids with strep throat, right? It got to the point where I wasn't allowing myself to rest and recover. I would just take another course of antibiotics and go back to work the next day once the antibiotics kicked in. And I ended up hospitalized because the strep throat crawled down from my throat and into my digestive system, essentially into my intestines.
Wow.
And so I ended up in the emergency room needing IV antibiotics because I just did not pay attention to the fact that, oh, when you're sick, you should take time off and rest, even if that inconveniences other people, even if that makes other people annoyed and angry, right? I didn't have it in me at that time to, I guess I'll say, stay strong in the face of my idea that other people would be annoyed or would be
Mm-hmm.
irritated, let alone if they actually were, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so, that's self-abandonment, right? And that's what happens over time. And you said, once you get into crisis, like there's the perfect example. I was in a massive crisis and here's the kicker to the story. I walked myself to the emergency room. I couldn't even
Yeah.
ask for help to get to the emergency room. I knew I didn't want to drive there because I knew I'd probably be staying overnight. So I walked 6 blocks to the emergency room on my own in massive amounts of pain. Like they actually thought it was appendicitis when I first got there. So this is your cautionary tale
Yeah.
for what self-abandonment can look like and how messed up growing up with a narcissist can make us in terms of not being able to ask for help, not being able to say, this is what I need, not being able to set limits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The boundary can also be, I need this. It's not necessarily like, I don't need this. It can also be, I need you to do this for me. And if you can't
Mm-hmm.
do this for me, then we can't have a relationship. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Anyway, that's my cautionary tale.
I think there's also something about being in shock and the effects of trauma and how that can affect the ability to set boundaries and self-care. I'm thinking about a time I was in my 20s and I was in therapy and I had some kind of wound or cut or something like that. And my therapist said to me, she's like, well, what do you do when you have a cut or a wound or whatever? I just didn't know what she was talking about. And she's like, you put a Band-Aid on it. And it's not like I'd never seen Band-Aids, right? It's not like I didn't know they existed. My mom had put Band-Aids on me, as a kid. It's not like I
Right.
was mistreated in that way, but I was so addled and in crisis and shock all the time
Yeah.
that I didn't have the cognitive chain in place
Yeah.
to bother, right, to do this little thing for myself. Because if it wasn't a crisis, like, I mean, if I had gone, sometimes it's as scary as if I had left the room to go get a Band-Aid, my mom would have fucking lost it, for the next 5 hours,
Yeah.
Or if I opened up the container of Band-Aids in a way that made noise, right? That would have set them off or something like that. And so you just learn not to do these things. You just don't do them.
Yeah.
And here's my, aha moment, which is that objects don't have boundaries. Objects can't self-reflect.
Yeah.
Objects don't have needs.
Yeah.
Objects don't have preferences.
Yeah.
So we are not allowed to have boundaries.
Right.
Because we're not people.
Yeah. Yeah. Your, phone never says like, I'm too tired. You've used me too much today.
Right.
Like,
if only.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit quickly about how to set boundaries when Elizabeth, you talked earlier about sort of the first thing is just sort of knowing you're uncomfortable, but you may not know why. And that is sort of the first thing we become aware of. Like, this doesn't feel good. I feel stressed. I don't know why. I just know I don't feel good in my body. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to talk a little bit about what you can do when that happens as sort of your first foray into setting boundaries. So if you're in a stressful situation, it is 100% absolutely okay to say, I need a break. I need to walk away for a minute. I need time on my own to process this.
Yeah.
Whatever way you want to phrase it, and leave the situation. It's absolutely okay, no matter what's going on, no matter how riled up the other person is, no matter how much of a crisis it feels like they're in, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's making you feel stressed out in this way that, again, if you've grown up with a narcissist, right? It's not stressed out because the situation is stressful. It's stressed out because of how they're making you feel in this situation.
Yeah.
Then it's absolutely okay to be like, you know what? I need a few minutes. I need a few minutes to process this. And they're going to act like if you walk away, they're going to die. And I don't recommend doing this if it's actually a life-threatening situation. Like if somebody's, having a heart attack, don't be like, I need a few minutes to process before I call 911. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the crisis is, oh gosh, I'm trying to think of a crisis that my mom did.
The napkins are the wrong color.
She's out of the right kind of napkins and guests are coming over.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. You are allowed to walk away and be like, you know what? The conversation right now isn't making me feel good. I'm going to walk away and take a few minutes. So yes, not an actual emergency, but like all of the things that narcissists claim to be emergencies, but actually aren't. And then you take a short time out or you like go to the bathroom. I've done this where I'm like, you know what? I'm sorry, I need to pee. And I don't need to pee. Mm-hmm. Just go into the bathroom to have a few minutes on my own to check in with myself and see if I can figure out why I'm uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You talked about this too, having a support person with you. So absolutely, as an adult, once I realized how crazy my mom was, I would not hang out with her without a close friend or a partner or someone with me. Mm-hmm. Just to have that feeling of support. And just to have the person afterwards that I can decompress with and be like, did you see when she did that? It's really important to have that person.
Yeah. Some things are like only seeing this person in public, right? Making sure that you meet people, don't take car rides with these people, those kinds of things. So, and we are talking about a lot of the ones so far are boundaries that we set when we like say them in the moment. But sometimes you can kind of build in these things so that you don't have to confront the narcissist. So for example, it's like, okay, how much time can I spend with this person before I start losing my shit in my head? And it's like, okay, well, if it's 15 minutes, then it's 15 minutes. And that means that you only spend 5 minutes with them, right? So if you realize that there's a boundary that you need to set, but you are unable to set that boundary in a way that is polite and even tempered, then your boundary is actually a lot firmer and a lot further out than you think it is, because you want to actually build in to your boundary the emotional energy to be calm and present and clear about it.
One last thing I want to touch on, and then we can go on to our mini crazy mom off, is when you're thinking about boundaries to set, when you start doing it, anything you think of doing is probably going to seem unreasonable to you because of how you were trained by the narcissist and your past trauma. So you actually brought up this concept of thinking of 4 solutions, and one of them is like totally out there and doesn't make sense. So do you want to explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, some of this comes from when I was doing like psychoeducational stuff with like elementary students and middle schoolers, which is you give them like a problem and then like a piece of paper, and they divide it up into 4 or 6 panels, and they have to draw different solutions. It was like they had to do at least one, which was like totally ridiculous. Like aliens come down and I don't know,
Teleport my mother away so I never have to see her again.
Yeah, exactly. Or something like that. Right. So, and the thing about like the crazy thing, right? The thing that's kind of ridiculous is it re-engages your humor and the sense of the absurd, which really undercuts this sense of crisis. Right. It's just, first of all, it can be very satisfying because it's like, actually, no, I really want these giant mechas to come in and blow up my childhood home. Right. So my inner child's just like, yes, So
that would be one solution to like having to go to the weekly family dinner.
Yes. Actually, yeah. So it kind of re-engages the parts of yourself that are younger and access joy and have aliveness. And that's one of those things that narcissists just, take from us. Right. Yeah. So it's a way of taking things back, which is the absurd and the funny and the ridiculous.
I didn't really think about it in this way until just now, but that's one of the reasons that when we started this podcast, we wanted it to be funny, because there is such a overwhelming drive to have everything be a crisis around the narcissist. And then that's something we sort of absorb. And then a lot of people just take that into their own lives, even after they've moved out of their family home. It's just jumping from crisis to crisis because it feels familiar, right? And you're actually addicted to all of those neuropeptides, which is a whole other episode we could do. But, bringing play and joy and humor and absurdity back to your life is incredibly important, because you didn't get to be a kid. You didn't get to be goofy and funny, right? Because that was probably inconvenient to the narcissist.
Yeah.
Right.
And the other thing about that is that it's very hard to turn humor and the ridiculousness and silliness into a form of self-abandonment, right? Because it's like, this isn't going to help solve world hunger. I guess I could try to make a joke for someone else, but it's like, that's just, there's nothing in that,
Yeah.
So it's a way of nurturing yourself and feeding yourself in a way that you can't steal it from yourself, which is what narcissists teach us to do.
Yeah. They steal our joy from us and then teach us how to steal our joy from ourselves.
Yeah.
All right. Mini crazy mom off. Do you have a story in mind?
I do. And it's one that I am really mad about. So
good. I'll be mad for you. I'm gonna hate your parents for you.
Okay. All righty. Okay. So from the age of 13 to 18, when I went to college, I was not allowed to close my door to my room. So when I was 13, my mom found out about my girlfriend, and she told me that I lost my right to privacy. And she actually bought a doorstop, and I was not allowed to close my door. I had to change my clothes in my bathroom. And it wasn't until I came back from my first semester, freshman year of college, that I closed my door.
I have so many things to say about that. But first of all, I mean, it's demeaning, right? It is
Yeah.
controlling. It is, I mean, disrespectful isn't even enough. It's violating,
Yeah.
it is all of the things that we talk about when we talk about psychological abuse and manipulation. It's control. It's, yeah, I can't even imagine not being able to have a space as a teenager, any teenager, even a teenager in a like relatively healthy family. I can't imagine not being able to have a space where you could just go be on your own and
Yeah.
have your own thoughts and listen to music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it is a little perceived form of sexual abuse. We tend to think of sexual abuse as over sexualizing a child,
Mhm.
but to refuse to allow a person to have a sexual self, that is also a form of sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And then when you add in the like being a teenager and the context of you no longer have any privacy
Yeah.
as a retaliation against a private sexual relationship, that's, I don't really even know how to go into that, how disturbing that can be.
And what a fucked up and weird solution. I mean, okay, so your mom was homophobic and couldn't deal with the fact that her daughter was queer, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that's one thing. But to have the solution be something that is so manipulative and abusive and controlling and have it go on for years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just so fucked up. That's so fucked up. And also the whole thing of like, you've lost your right to privacy. Like,
Yeah. I didn't
that's,
deserve it.
you
I
didn't
didn't
deserve,
deserve privacy anymore.
I mean, that's like a basic human right. That's like saying, like, that was okay, but what if she'd made you keep your bathroom door open because you'd lost the right to privacy to like take a crap on your own? Do you know what I mean? Like, that's so, like, she can make that argument for your bedroom, but if she'd done it for your bathroom, it would have been abuse. No, like, it's all abuse, like taking someone's ability to have privacy away is absolutely manipulative and controlling and horrible. Ugh, God, your mom, so fucked up, so
Thank you.
controlling.
Thank you. I am too angry and shocked to really take in what you're saying. I don't know if you noticed the 1,000 yard stare that's going on over here.
Did I make you dissociate again?
No, my mother made me dissociate.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I remember, I think even as a teenager, I knew that somehow that your mom wouldn't let you close your door. But as a teenager, I didn't know it was because she found out you had a girlfriend.
Oh, yeah. Well, because she wouldn't let anybody know.
Right. Of course.
And I did literally get, how could you do this to us?
Right. Yes.
She literally said that.
Yeah.
Like, this is the one thing that had nothing to do with you. And that's exactly what it is,
Well,
right?
a narcissist's special talent is making everything about themselves,
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
it's
that was the
amazing.
real crime, right? The real
That
crime,
is,
because
yeah,
toys don't play with each other.
right? How dare you not be the toy that's doing what she wants you to do?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Toys don't play with
Yes.
each other. Does that mean Toy Story is like a whole anti-narcissism movie? Because they definitely do play with each other in that movie.
I think that would be great. That would be great.
Wow. Okay. My story is about when I was I was probably in my mid 20s and I was trying to set boundaries with my mom so that I only had to interact with her once a week. We lived in different cities at this point. I was in San Francisco and she was in LA. And so I set the boundary in place. Again, this was like my therapist was helping me set this boundary, right? So I set the boundary in place that we were only going to talk on the phone once a week, and it was only going to be for 30 minutes. That was my boundary that I put in
Mm.
place. So on Sunday evenings, we would talk on the phone for 30 minutes at a designated time. It was like 7 to 7:30. And of course, she like railed against, well, why does it have to be that time? And what's wrong that we can't talk for more than 30 minutes? And blah, 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 right? But I was firm. And it went okay for like probably 3 or 4 weeks. And then I see a call come through from her on like a Wednesday. And I didn't answer it. But then when I went to go get the message, it was, oh, I saw one of your preschool friends' parents on the street the other day, and they said hi. And so I wanted you to know that they said hi.
Uh-huh.
And so the next Sunday when we talked, I said, hey, by the way, just letting you know that wasn't okay that you called me, and left that message. And she lost it. All of a sudden, the narcissistic rage came out. She just thought I'd want to know. How could it possibly not be okay to pass along good wishes from somebody else? Tell me what's wrong with that, right?
Mm-hmm. And even making you justify it, that's what's wrong, right?
And again, it's not, even if like Ed McMahon had handed her a check for me for $1 million, I still would have wanted her to wait till Sunday. Like it had nothing to do with the content of the interaction or what she was telling me. It was about her being able to respect that I can only tolerate her once a week for 30 minutes, which was already too much, right?
Right. And if my child said to me, I can only tolerate you a half an hour once a week at a time, I would be in therapy. I'd be crying, but I would be like, I am fucking up so bad. Like, what is going on?
Well, you were a very, very different person than my mom was.
You realize how many times I'm going to remind myself that in the next 10 years? Megan told me I wasn't like her mom. No, seriously. Like, I know in the dead of night,
God, I'm going to make
myself feel better by just being like, you know what? Megan told me I wasn't like her.
So as a result of that, I mean, I got yelled at. It was incredibly uncomfortable. So I ended the phone calls. I went, that's it. If you can't handle keeping to once a week, if that's too hard for you, then we're going to go to 0. Like, we're just not going to talk. But it was such a simple boundary. It wasn't like I was saying I never want to talk to you again. I was just saying like, I only want to talk to you once a week for half an hour. Right. And she couldn't even abide by that. And she couldn't even understand why contacting me on a Wednesday to tell me she saw someone that I didn't even remember. Yeah, I remember my friend when I was 3's mom. Sure.
Right.
Why that wasn't okay. And that the fact that it was the contact that wasn't okay, not the content of her message that wasn't okay, right? That's what she sort of latched onto.
Well, sure, because that's a deflection, right? It's just a classic deflection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where it's like, boundaries make them feel rejected and left out. And, it's so easy to think about, it's just a little thing. Like, why can't you just let it go? Why can't you just let your mom call you or whatever? It's like, no, you don't understand. I set the small boundary. It's not just this small boundary. This is like, it's like the straw that breaks the camel's back. And it is something little, but it's in the context of the millions and millions and millions of ways that this person has violated you, in your personal space, psychologically, emotionally, in your life, in your friends' lives. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Well, and abusers start small, right? They start with small boundary violations.
Yeah.
To test and see whether they can get away with that. Yeah. And then if they can, they start playing bigger and bigger and bigger, but they never stop doing the small ones. Like they just, expand the, range of what they're doing. So
Mm-hmm.
you still always get the small ones and, just added on or bigger ones and bigger ones or bigger ones. So yes, that was a relatively small one. But by that point, it had been years of me being in therapy and working on this. And my boundaries were super clear at that point. This is what I can tolerate.
Yeah.
I'm not willing to bend them or stretch them. Again, if it was an emergency, if she called me on a Wednesday because she was, you know,
Yeah.
needed emergency medical attention, that would have been something different. But everything's an emergency to her, right? So,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. Okay. Tools, tricks, strategies. How did you get through the week?
Oh my gosh. I don't know.
I have one to share that happened
Please
last night.
do. Yeah, please do.
So I had just a sort of a hectic day yesterday. It wasn't even anything too stressful, but it was like I had a couple clients and then I had to drive across town to drop something off. It was half an hour and then drive back and there was traffic and da, 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 da. It was just like it was a busy, busy day. And I decided when I got home, and again, I know as a single person, not everyone can do this, but I think you can do it to some extent. When I got home, I just decided to turn off my devices, to
Wow.
not answer the texts that had come in during the day because I was so busy I couldn't answer them. So to not answer the texts that had come in during the day, to not look at half the emails. I think I answered a couple of them that I felt like I had the spoons to answer them, but I left the rest of them. I just left everything till today. I just didn't answer. That to me feels like a good boundary. Like I know that if I answer these texts, if I engage these people, even the initial response is going to feel like more energy that I have, but then they're going to reply back and want to ask, chat. And I don't have that in me right now. I just ignored everything and let it sit until today. And it felt really good.
That is really great.
And no one died. No one died from not having their text answered the same day.
I'm going to take that in and see if I can create the possibility for me to do something like that. That's so great. Hmm. I think I'll share something that I did yesterday, which is someone I care about that I live with asked me to do something for them that I didn't want to do. And I just said to them, I was like, you know what? I don't want to do that.
Ooh.
And it wasn't, I've done this before. And I think part of it is what I've actually found out is that there's an intimacy in the honesty, right? And that it often shifts the behavior or it shifts the energy so that if the person knows that I don't want to do it, right? And there's some kind of renegotiation or whatever,
Yeah.
then I'm like, you know what? Okay. I mean, and it doesn't necessarily feel like a capitulation. It's really more of like, I'm just going to share with you, what's actually in here. It's just actually really great, to just be honest. Like, oh man, no,
Yeah.
no, I
Yeah.
don't want to. It doesn't mean I'm not going to do it, like, especially if it's your kid asking you to do something, but just to be open. And that's also one of those things, which is like setting a boundary does not have to be closing things off, right? It can be a form of intimacy, right?
Yeah.
Just sharing how you're feeling, like I'm uncomfortable or whatever.
Could be a way to open a conversation, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Instead of just doing the thing and sort of resenting it or feeling, overburdened or taxed or exhausted, like you can still do it in the end, but at least you can have a conversation with the person about it.
Yeah, absolutely. My husband and I, we kind of have this thing, which is like, that I'm doing this because I love you, right? Because that's the only reason why I'm doing it, because I don't want to do it for myself,
Right.
but and it's just kind of like, I'm telling you that this expression of love, right? So it goes in the bank.
I think you can also do that for yourself. Like,
Yeah.
I think I shared with you that I've started at night, right before I go to bed, I've started thinking about what's going to make tomorrow Megan's life easier. Right. So,
Yeah.
and then I'll end up doing something like emptying the dishwasher because I know I'm not going to want to do it in the morning. And I know I'm out of spoons to like make my coffee in the morning, right? They're all clean in the dishwasher, but I'm not going to want to unload it in the morning or run the dishwasher so I have clean spoons or whatever, right? And I will
Yeah.
do 2 or 3 things that I don't want to do, but I'm doing it because I love me. And that's really the only reason I'm doing it. So that tomorrow me will have a slightly easier start to her day because I'm not a morning person. It's an understatement of the year. So I think we can also do that with ourselves.
Yeah. And that's the thing about only in my body, right? Can I tell the difference between an act of caring and an act of self-abandonment, right? If you were doing it with a different internal experience, it would feel like self-abandonment, right? But it isn't. It is an act of caring towards yourself.
I was doing it because I felt like, my partner would get annoyed that there weren't clean dishes in the cupboard in the morning. That would be self-abandonment. That wouldn't be doing it out of self-love. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So if you have any questions or comments, or if you want to share your own crazy mom story to be anonymously on the show, please send us an email. We are at H2, the number 2B, the letter B, terrible at gmail.com. That's H2B terrible at gmail.com.
And if you have trouble processing audio information, you can also look at that email on our Instagram. And just as a last word, as much as we suggest you don't listen to your mom, maybe you should listen to her, but listen to her in a way that she doesn't quite expect, which is just go for it and be the villain.
Be the villain.
Be the villain.
Hello, listeners. We wanted to pop in to tell you that this is the last episode of season 1 of How to Be a Terrible Daughter.
Thanks for sticking with us through the emotional minefields and all the mini crazy mom offs. We'll be back soon with more stories, more survival tips, and more what the fuck moments.
Until then, keep your boundaries and sanity intact, and maybe avoid answering any suspiciously innocent phone calls from mom.
See you in season 2. Thank you for listening. We'd be so grateful if you'd follow or subscribe and rate and review our new podcast on your favorite podcast app.
Make sure to share it with friends, family, or anyone that you think may benefit from this content.
And as a final reminder, you are not the crazy one.